Hey guys, Sam over here. I'm going to pick up where I left off reading Twilight for y'all on pages 110 and 111. I do not own the Twilight Saga. This is not copyright infringement intended. Stephen Meyer's owns the Twilight Saga in the universe. I just thought y'all might want to hear somebody read it. Here we go. I would be the new girl from the big city, a curiosity, a freak. Maybe if I looked like the girl from Phoenix should, I could work this to my advantage, but physically I never would fit in anywhere. I should be tan, sporty, blonde, a volleyball player, or cheerleader, perhaps. All the things that go with living in the valley of the sun. Instead, I was ivory skinned, without every excuse of blue eyes or red hair, despite the constant sunshine. I had always been slender, but soft, somehow obviously not an athlete. I hadn't eye coordination to play sports without humiliating myself and harming both myself and anyone else who stood too close. When I finished putting my clothes in the old pine dresser, I took my bag of bathroom necessities and went to the communal bathroom to clean myself up after the day of travel. I looked at my face in the mirror as I brushed through my tangled damp hair. Maybe it was the light, but already I looked swollen, unhealthy. My skin could be pretty. It was clear, almost translucent looking. But it all depended on color. I had no color there. My face paled the reflection in the mirror, I was forced to admit. I was lying to myself. I wasn't just physically that I wouldn't fit in. It's that I couldn't even find a niche in the school of 3,000 people. What were my chances here? If I couldn't find a niche in a school of 3,000 people, what were my chances here? I didn't relate well to people my age. Maybe the truth was I didn't relate to people, period. Even my mother, who I was closer to than anyone else on the planet, was never in harmony with me, never on the same exact page. Sometimes I wonder if I would see the same things through my eyes that the rest of the world was seeing through theirs. Maybe there was a glitch in my brain, maybe, but that cause didn't matter. All that mattered was the effect, and tomorrow would be just the beginning. I didn't sleep well that night. Even after I was done crying, and the constant swooshing of rain and wind across the roof wouldn't fade me to the background. I pulled the faded old quilt over my head and laid there, added the pillow too. I couldn't fall asleep until after midnight, when the rain finally settled into a quieter drizzle. The thick fog was all I could see out my window in the morning, and I could feel the claustrophobia creep up on me. But you could never see the sky here. It was like a cage. Breakfast with Charlie was a quiet event. He wished me good luck at school. I thanked him, knowing his hope was wasted. Good luck tended to avoid me. Charlie left first off to the police station. That was his wife and family after he left. I sat at the old square oak table in one of the 3 unmatching chairs that reclaimed a small kitchen with its dark paneled walls, bright yellow cabinets, and white aluminum floor. Nothing changed. My mother painted the cabinets 18 years ago in an attempt to bring sunshine into the house. Over the small fireplace adjoining a handkerchief family-size heirloom was a row of pictures. First was a wedding picture of Charlie and my mom in Las Vegas. Then one of the 3 of us in the hospital after I was born, taken by a helpful nurse, followed by the procession of school pictures up to the last years. These were embarrassing to look at. I would have to see what I could do to get Charlie to put them somewhere else, at least while I was living here. It was impossible being in this house, not realizing that Charlie had never gotten over my mom. It made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to be too early for school, but I couldn't stay in the house anymore. I donned my jacket, which had the feeling of a biohazard suit, and headed out into the rain. It was just a drizzle, but still not enough to soak me through immediately as I reached for the house key that was hidden under the eave of the door and locked up. The sloshing of my new waterproof boots was inedible. I missed the normal country sound of gravel as I walked. I couldn't pause and admire my truck as I wanted. I was in a hurry to get out of this miserable wet that swirled around my head and clung to my hair under my hood. Inside the truck, it was nice and dry. Either Billy or Charlie had obviously cleaned it up. But with the tan upholstered seating, the smell of faint tobacco and gasoline and peppermint, the engine quickly started to my relief, but the loud roar into life and idled top volume. Well, a truck this old was bound to have a flaw, and the antique radio worked was a plus I wasn't expecting. Finding the school wasn't difficult, though I'd never been there before. The school was like most other things, just off the highway. It was not obvious that it was a school, other than the sign that declared it to be Forks High School claimed it to be Forks High School made me stop. It looked like the collection of matching houses built in maroon-colored bricks. There were so many trees and shrubs, I couldn't see its size at first. Where was the feeling of intuition? I wondered nostalgically. Where were the chain link fences and metal detectors? I parked in front of the first building, which had a small sign over the door reading front office. No one else parked there, so I was sure it was off limits, but I decided I would get directions inside instead of circling around in the rain like an idiot. I stepped unwillingly out of the toasty cabin of the truck and walked up the stone path lined of the dark hedge. Took a deep breath before opening the door. Inside was a brightly lit and warmer than I'd hoped office with a small little waiting area with padded folding chairs, orange-flecked commercial carpet. Noticing the awards that hung on the wall, the big clock ticking loudly. Plants grew everywhere in large plastic pots as if there wasn't already enough greenery outside. The room was cut in half by a long counter cluttered with wire baskets full of paper. The brightly colored flyers taped to its front. There were 3 desks behind the counter, of which mannered by a large red-headed woman wearing glasses. She was wearing a purple t-shirt, which immediately made me feel overdressed. The red-headed woman looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm Isabella Swan," I informed her. Saw the immediate awareness light up in her eyes, as I was expecting. I was the topic of gossip, no doubt. "Daughter of Chief Flattery ex-wife home at last." "Of course," she said. She dug through her precariously stacked pile of documents on her desk until she found ones that she was looking for. "I have your schedule right here and a map of the school." She brought several sheets to me on the counter. As she went through the class, she highlighted the best routes on the map, gave me a slip for my teacher to sign, which I had to bring back at the end of the day. She smiled and hoped, like Charlie, that I would like it here in Forks. I smiled convincingly as I could. Sorry. When I went back to my truck, other students were starting to arrive. I drove around the school until following the line of traffic. I was glad most of the cars were old like mine, nothing flashy. At home, I lived in one of the lower income neighborhoods that were included Paradise Valley District. It was common to see a new Mercedes or Porsche in the school lot. The nicest car here was a shiny Volvo. It stood out. Still, I cut the engine as soon as I was in a spot. That thunder's volume wouldn't draw attention. I looked at the map of my truck, trying to memorize it now. Hopefully, I wouldn't have to walk around with it stuck in front of my nose all day. I stuffed everything in my bag, slung a strap over my shoulder, and sucked in a huge breath. I can do this, I lied to myself feebly. No one is going to bite me. I finally inhaled and stepped out of the truck. I kept my face pulled back until my hood walked as I walked to the sidewalk, crowded with teenagers. My plain black jacket didn't stand out, I noticed with relief. Once I got around the cafeteria building, 3 was easy to spot, a large black 3 painted on the white square on the east corner. I felt my breathing gradually creep towards hyperventilation. I approached the door, trying to hold my breath. I followed 2 unisex raincoats through the door. The classroom was small. The people in front stopped inside the door, hanging their coats on the long row hooks. I copied them. There were 2 girls, one porcelain-colored blonde, also pale, with light brown color hair. At least my skin wouldn't stand out here. I took my slip to the teacher, a tall, balding man whose desk nameplate identified his name as Mr. Mason. He gawked at me when he saw my name. Not an encouraging response. Of course, I flushed tomato red. But at least he sent me to an empty desk in the back without introducing me to the class. It was harder for my new classmates to stare back, but somehow they managed. I kept my eyes down on the reading list the teacher gave me, which was fairly basic. Bronte, Shakespeare, I'm gonna butcher his name. Chaucer, and Faulkner. I've already read everything. That was comforting but boring. I wondered if my mom would have sent me a folder of my old essays, or if she would think that was cheating. I went through different arguments in my head as the teacher droned on till the bell rang, nasally buzzing sound of a gangly boy with skin problems and black hair and oily slicked across me to the owl. You're Isabella Swan, aren't you? Bella, I corrected. Everyone within 3 seats turned to stare at me. Where's your next class? I had to check my bag. Government with Jefferson in Building 6. Then out of nowhere, to look. Sorry. Without meeting curious eyes, I'm heading towards Building 4. I could show you the way. I'm Eric, he added. Thanks. We got our jackets and head out toward the rain, which had picked up. I could have sworn several people were behind us, walking close enough to eavesdrop. I hoped I wasn't getting paranoid. So, this is a lot different from Phoenix, huh? Very. It doesn't rain much there, does it? 3 or 4 times a year. Wow, what must it be like? Sunny, I told him. You don't look very tan. My mother is part albino. He studied my face, apparently. I sighed. It looked like clouds had and sense of humor didn't mix. A few months of this, and I'd forget how to use sarcasm. We walked back around the cafeteria to the south buildings of the gym. Eric walked me to the door, even though it was clearly marked. Well, good luck, he said, touching the handle. Maybe we'll have some classes together, he sounded hopeful. I smiled at him vaguely and went inside. The rest of the morning passed in the same fashion. My trigonometry teacher, Mr. Vager, who I have hated anyway because of the subject he taught, was the only one who made me stand in front of the class and introduce myself. I stammered, blushed, and tripped over my own boots on the way to my seat. After 2 classes, I started recognizing several faces in each class. There was always someone braver than the others that would introduce themselves and ask me questions, like how I like living in Forks. I tried to be diplomatic, but I mostly lied a lot. At least, I never needed the map. One girl who sat next to me in trig and Spanish and walked with me to the cafeteria for lunch. She was tiny, 7 inches shorter than my 5 feet 4 inches. Wild, curly, dark hair. Difference, a lot of difference between our height. I couldn't remember her name, but I smiled and nodded, and as she prated about the teachers and the classes, I didn't try to keep up. We sat at the table at a full table, and several of her friends. She introduced me. I forgot all their names as soon as she spoke them. I remembered, impressed by her bravery to speak to me. The boy from English, Eric, waved to me from across the room. It was there, sitting in the lunchroom, trying to make conversation with 7 curious strangers, that I first saw them. They were sitting in the corner of the cafeteria, as far away as I sat as possible in the long room. There were 5 of them. They wouldn't talk, and they weren't talking, and they weren't eating, even though each of them had a tray of untouched food in front of them. They weren't gawking at me, unlike most of the other students, so it was safe to stare with them with the fear of meeting them. Interesting pair of eyes, but nonetheless, these things held my attention. Cotton held my attention. It didn't. They didn't look anything alike. One of the 3 boys was big, muscular, seriously a weightlifter with dark curly hair. Another tall, leaner, but still muscular, was honey blonde. The last was less lanky, bulky, and untidy bronze-colored hair was more boyish than the others, that looked like he could have gone to college or even teached rather than students. The girls were the opposite. One was tall, statured, and had a beautiful figure, like the kind you saw in the corner of Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. The kind that made every girl around her take a hit to their self-esteem just by being in the same room. Her hair was gold, gently waved in the middle of her back. Short girl with pixie thin like extremes, with shortcut features. Her hair was deep black, cropped short, pointing in every direction, and yet they were exactly alike. Every one of them chalkly pale, palest students living in a sunless town, paler than me, the albino. They were all very dark-eyed, despite having strange range in hair tones. They were also had dark shadows under their eyes, purplish bruised like shadows, as if they were all suffering from a sleepless night, or almost done recovering from a broken nose, although their noses and all their features were straight, perfect, angular. But all of this, this is not why I couldn't look away. I stared at their faces, so different, so similar, all devastatingly and humanly beautiful, but their faces were never expected to see, perhaps, on the airbrush pages of a magazine, or painted by an old master at the face of a beautiful angel. It was hard to decide who was more beautiful. Maybe the perfect blonde girl or the bronze-haired boy. They were all looking away from each other, away from the other students, away from any particular, as far as I could tell. So I watched the small girl Rose with her tray, unopened soda, unbitten apple, and walked away quickly, gracefully loping the belonging. Grace was quick, graceful lope that belonged on the runway. I watched amazed as her little dancer stepped until she dumped her tray and then glided through the back door faster than I would have thought possible. My eyes darted back to each other's, who sat unchanging. "Who are they?" I asked the girl from my Spanish class whose name I'd forgotten. As she looked up to see who I meant, though already knowing, probably from my tone, suddenly he looked at her, the thin one, the boyish one, the youngest perhaps. He looked at her with naval satisfaction for a second, and his dark eyes flickered to mine. He looked away quickly, more quickly than I could have thought, with a flush of embarrassment. I dropped my eyes at once, with a brief flash glance. His face held nothing of interest. It was as if she had called his name and he looked up voluntarily. Nothing had decided not to answer. My neighbor giggled in embarrassment, looking at the table as I did. That's Edward and Emmett Cullen, Rosalie and Jasper Hale. The one to the left is Alice. They live with Dr. Cullen and his wife, she said, just under her breath. A sideways glance. The beautiful boy looking up from his tray now picked up a bagel in pieces along with his pale fingers, his mouth moving very quickly, perfectly, lips barely opening. There were three of them still looking away, yet he was still speaking quietly to them. Strange and popular names, I thought, the kind of names grandparents had. But maybe they were in vogue here, small town names. Finally, I remembered that my neighbor was Jessica, a perfectly common name. There were two girls named Jessica in my history class back home. They are very nice looking, I suggested, as the encouragement statement. Yes, Jessica agreed with the giggle. They are together, though. Rosalind, Emmett, Alice, and Jasper. I mean, and they live together. Her voice held all the shock and come dinner of a small towns, I thought, critically. But if I was being honest, I had to admit, even in Phoenix, it would have caused gossip. Which ones are the Cullens? They don't look related. Oh, they're not. Dr. Cullen is really young, in his 20s, early 30s, and they adopted the Hales, a brother and sister, the Blondes. They are foster children. They look a little old to be for foster children. They are now. Rose and Jasper are 18 when he and Mrs. Cullen. They have been with Mr. and Mrs. Cullen since they were 8. She's their aunt or something. That's really nice of them for them to take care of those kids like that when they were so young and everything. I guess so, Jessica admitted reluctantly. I got the impression she didn't like the doctor and his wife for some reason, but the glances thrown around at their adopted children, I suppose jealousy. I think Mrs. Cullen can't have kids, though, she added, as if it lessened their kindness. Although this conversation, my eyes flickered again to the table of the strange family that sat. They continued to look at the wall and not eat. And have they always lived in Forks? I asked. Surely I would have noticed them in my summers here. No, she said. Her voice implied they obviously are new arrivals like me. They just moved down here 2 years ago from somewhere in Alaska. And I'm going to stop there and pick up in a bit. Talk to y'all later. So move you out.